Hey Leo, Avery again, and I'm going to read you the story of Dave and the Giant Pickle.
With the story of Dave and the Giant Pickle. Now, all you have to do is remember that whenever you hear this sound, it's time to turn the page. Okay, are you ready? It's time for Dave and the Giant Pickle.
Now, Dave lived in a land called Israel a long, long time ago. So long ago that there weren't any cars, or telephones, or vacuum cleaners, or anything. There were mostly just sheep, especially around Dave's house because Dave was a shepherd. Now, Dave and his 7 brothers spent most of their time in the fields taking care of their sheep. This could be hard work because their sheep had an unusual problem.
They tip over.
But Dave had an even bigger problem. Of all the brothers, he was the smallest, and sometimes his big brothers would pick on him.
Oh, Dave, one of my sheep fell over. Would you come pick it up for me?
His brothers would say. If Dave said no, his brothers would remind him about the time they dipped him in tar and stuck him to the backside of an angry water buffalo.
I'll be right there.
Yep, that's how things have pretty much always been for Dave, until one day when their dad Jesse came running out with some horrible news.
The Philistines are attacking!
He said, this was really bad news because the Philistines were people who hated Israel. They wanted to take Israel's land and make the Israelites their slaves, so they have to do whatever the Philistines told them to do. Jesse told the boys that King Saul was building an army to stop the Philistines. If they joined Saul's army, they could help save Israel. This was very exciting, so all the brothers headed off together. But as they were leaving, Jesse yelled out,
Hey, Dave! Where do you think you were going?
Dave answered. Then Jesse said,
It's very nice that you want to help, but saving a country is a big thing. You're a little guy. Big people do big things, and little people do little things. So, stay with the sheep.
Dave was very sad. As his brothers went off to help King Saul, he looked at his sheep and wondered.
Why can't little guys do big things?
By the time Dave's brothers arrived at King Saul's camp, battle lines had been drawn between the Philistines and the Israelites, and, as was the custom in their day, the armies lined up and yelled at each other. The Philistines hollered,
You will be a slave and you have to pay just as me bears. And I am now father. And my family live down those days. And scratch that spot on your backs we cannot reach no matter how hard we try.
The Israelites weren't as good at the yelling, so one of the Philistines came up with an idea.
How about if we bring out our strongest man and you bring out your strongest man? And they will fight. If our champion beats your champion, you will be our slave. But if your champion defeats us, we will be your slave. What do you think about that?
Well, the Israelites were getting kind of tired of the yelling, and the Philistines did seem a little on the small side, so King Saul agreed.
That seems like a reasonable idea.
He said,
All right, we agree. Send out your champion.
what King Saul didn't know was that the Philistines' champion was Goliath, the biggest, meanest, hairiest guy they'd ever seen.
Who will I fight?
Goliath roared. The Israelites were so scared that they all ran away and hid.
Nobody will fight. I'll come back tomorrow.
And that's exactly what he did. Goliath came back the next day, and the next day, and the next day, for 40 days. But every time he showed up, all the Israelites ran away and hid. Finally, Jesse started to worry about his boys, so he sent little Dave to the battlefield with some food. Now, Dave got to King Saul's camp just about the time Goliath was going to come out, so all the Israelites were hiding. Dave called out,
Is anybody here?
When he finally found his brothers, they told him about Goliath and about how someone needed to fight him.
Well,
Dave asked.
who's going to fight him? What are you, nuts?
His brothers answered.
He'd have us for lunch. Speaking of which, what'd you bring us?
Dave couldn't believe his ears. Had they forgotten that they were the children of God? Dave and his brothers had been taught that the Israelites were God's chosen people. God led them through the desert. He helped them walk across the Red Sea. And whenever they went into battle, God was there with them. They have always known that if God was on their side, no one could stand against them. But now King Saul and his men were so scared of big, tall Goliath, they had forgotten that God was even bigger.
No one to fight.
Goliath mumbled.
They told me that you are the children of God. You are cowards. I come back tomorrow.
Well, that was just too much for Dave. Little guy or not, someone had to fight Goliath. Dave knew exactly what he had to do, so he went straight to King Saul and announced,
I will fight Goliath.
King Saul took the news rather well.
I'm sorry, my ears must be failing.
He said,
I could have sworn I heard you say that you'd fight Goliath, but you didn't say that, did you? Yes, I did.
the king was amazed. A tiny little guy like Dave was no match for big, strong Goliath, but Dave was convinced that even though he was little, he could do big things with God's help. Finally, King Saul gave in. After all, he didn't want to fight Goliath, and everyone else was still hiding. Maybe Dave was his only choice.
All right.
He said,
If you're sure you know what you're getting into. Oh, dear.
well, Dave wasn't exactly sure what he was getting into, but he knew God would be there with him. So he went down to the stream and found 5 smooth stones. Then he went back to the camp and waited for Goliath.
Who will fight me?
Goliath bellowed. This time somebody answered.
I will fight you, Goliath.
When Goliath saw little Dave, he thought it was a joke.
Oh, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?
He laughed, but Dave wasn't kidding.
I don't exactly know what you mean,
He said,
but you are not a dog. You are a really big guy that wants to beat me up. And I come at you not with sticks, but in the name of the God of Israel, who this day shall help me defeat you.
Now Goliath was really mad. He stormed down the hill right at Dave. Dave swallowed hard, then put one of his small rocks into his sling and began swinging it around his head. The giant got closer and closer as Dave swung the sling faster and faster. With all his might, Dave let go of the sling and the rock sailed through the air, hitting Goliath right on the forehead. Everyone watched as the giant wiggled a little, then wobbled a little, then fell flat on his face. Dave had won! Now the Philistines were so scared of Dave that they all ran away and hid, and Israel was saved. And that's the story of Dave, a really little guy who did a really big thing. The end.